Let's continue. Good morning. I'm very happy to be the chair of this last session before the round table and before going to the castle. Thank you, Enrico. And it's a pleasure for me to present first, and then I will present Paola Italia, but first Simone Celani. He is full professor of Portuguese and Brazilian language and translation at the University of Rome, La Sapienza, and coordinator as me of a Portuguese Camões chair in Rome. His main areas of research include linguistic historiography, translation, literary linguistic, philosophy of contemporary works, with particular attention to Fernando Pessoa, and especially today, and to the Duke of Parma, and Lusophone Africa. So Simone is going to talk about something that we are all thinking, I guess, because we are suggesting Enrico not to stop today and continue with the project for at least 2 or 3 years more. And it's about the future of digital edition model of the Duke of Parma. And I know also at least Carlotta De Fenu, one of the organizers. She will be working on the Duke of Parma at least for 2 more years. So this is a table about the future of the Duke to close before the round table these incredible conferences. Welcome.
Thank you, Geronimo. Big responsibility. Well. I would like to begin with not entirely wholehearted thanks to dear Enrico for inviting me for the second time to speak about topics that I haven't dealt with for quite some time and on which I no longer feel particularly competent. I hope we will make up for this with the much publicized surprise planned for tonight. My thanks obviously also go to all those who have worked on the Duke of Parma over these years and who allow us to be here saying something at least minimally meaningful. And I thank, last but not least, Paola Italia for accepting this invitation, for the support she gave me in preparing this talk, and for the insightful reflections I am sure she will soon be able to offer, despite the meagerness of my contribution. I confess that I agreed to play this part only because I know that the reflections Paola will be able to draw from the little material I will manage to produce will be more than enough to give meaning to the whole and to achieve the goal we set for ourselves. After this wonderful example of captatio, I can go on. Second premise concerns the approach I adopted in the work I will be presenting today. I wish to stress that it is a project that has moved along a precarious balance between theory and practice, attempting to provide some possible experimental model which includes, among other things, a wide margin of error. I experimented with the few ideas and little material I had, and what truly matters will not be the results itself, but rather the definition of a process that could prove effective once all the basic ingredients are present and correct. The third and final premise concerns the meaning of all of these. When preparing an edition of a published work, the first question one asks, and one that unfortunately is sometimes left for last, is whether all this work is ultimately worthwhile. In essence, the question is, did we really need the Duke of Parma? Are we perhaps scraping the bottom of the famous trunk simply because we do not want to resign ourselves to the end of this delightful editorial and hermeneutic game that has accompanied us for so many years? And then, assuming that the edition is necessary, given the extremely complex and undefined conditions of the material we have, will we actually be able to bridge the abyssal distance between a philological edition and a divulgative one, between a critical edition and common reader? Will it be possible ultimately to create something accessible to a public slightly broader than the usual 10 people, so perversely inclined as to become excited at the mere sight of abstruse apparatuses and list of variants? A first answer to the first part of this question, whether the Duke is worth editing, can already be given. From what we can intuit even now, it is a work with several flaws, but also some merits. From what its flaws concern the construction of an admittedly conventional setting, the use of characters that are partly stereotypical and partly one-dimensional, and an excessive fragmentariness to make a coherent reconstruction extremely difficult. But the merits, in my view, counterbalance the flaws. Certain underlying themes, so intimately Pessoan, such as the thin boundary between lucidity and madness, the will to knowledge contrasted or juxtaposed with the dead drive, reflection on the complexity of human nature, on the fragmentariness of the self, on masquerade as a means of unveiling truth. And then some characters, above all Alberto and the Duke himself. The latter, in particular, deserves to be counted among the most interesting of Pessoa's alter egos. Finally, some scenes, through extremely sketchy in form, appears nonetheless powerful in their dramatic intensity, such as the rain scene of the final scene at the Duke's death. And there is no doubt that the work, like many others by Pessoa, is also a small mine of possible and improper aphorism, which I can already imagine included in new anthologies of paradoxical and extremely sharp statements, aphorism that will surely delight lovers of the decontextualized illuminations, ready to use them joyfully, inappropriately, in an Instagram story or a WhatsApp status. But let us finally turn to the true topic of this talk. A first reflection on the path that could lead us to a possible edition of the Duke of Parma. First of all, we must start from what we have and from what we would like to have. What we have is a series of documents whose material features allow us to identify clues for reconstructing a genetic process, or at least to formulate hypotheses about it. Another thing we have is a series of transcriptions of these documents that give us clues to reconstructing a work, or at least formulating hypotheses about it. These two levels, the material and the content-based, must converge in order to provide us with an overall vision of the project Pessoa had in mind and of the stage this project had reached at the moment of his death. Since these two elements are among the most problematic in all of Pessoan philology, the temptation might be to stop at what we effectively have, the document, to offer a supposedly objective representation of the state of the papers, to clarify that the very essence of Pessoa's work lies in its completeness and fragmentary nature, to identify the constant work in progress character of his production, to emphasize the impossibility, even the illegitimacy, of closing what the author or fate left open. And yet, it must be clear that this approach, however honest and meaningful, cannot be considered an endpoint from an editorial perspective. Our goal cannot be purely genetic, to describe how Pessoa wrote, to merely observe this process. Our goal must be to provide an edition to present the most probable hypothesis of the work Pessoa had in mind. We cannot stop at the level of the document, the text. We must reach the level of the work. I must again thank Paola Italia for pointing me to a wonderful issue of the journal Ecdotica, 2013, which contains an enlightened debate on the distinction between the two levels. Among the various essays in that issue, which I recommend everyone retrieve, we find Gabler's article, which clearly differentiates the editing of the text, meaning the material elements, from the editing of the work, which is instead an immaterial, ideal object, and emphasizes the importance of this second process. Also because the first type of edition does not take sufficient account of a factor that Eggert, in another article, defines as central, the reader, who is a constitutive part of the work. In the case of Pessoa, we are dealing with more or less potential works that never found their reader. The editor's primary task must be to bring the work and the reader together. We can also say, however, that the first type of edition, the edition of the text, is preparatory of the document. It is preparatory to the second, the edition of the work. So let us start with this first. The first step is the material description of the documents aimed at identifying isotopies that may allow us to identify phases of writing and possibly an internal chronology. Rather than starting from the facsimiles, I started from the descriptive records published in EVT. From this, I built an initial dataset containing the data of 68 documents already described, representing more than a third of the total documents forming the Duke's archive. I structured the dataset in two main sections, one dedicated to the sheets, to the papers, and one to the writing instrument, pens, pencils, typewriting text, colors. With the exception of paper dimensions, I structured the rest of the dataset on a binary matrix that could be easily used for later processing. This phase allowed me to identify a first flow in the description of the material that had been carried out. I did not follow uniform parameters or a common model. The most critical elements concern the measurement, which vary widely, and certain characteristics of the paper, such as the type of watermark or the color, which are not always indicated. The available data were nonetheless sufficient to define an initial descriptive model useful to experimentation. If the papers belong to several types and cannot be grouped into a very limited number of sets, the situation is different from writing instruments. In the sample, many documents show only one writing campaign, 15 show two campaigns, and only one show three between these 68 that I analyzed. Most are unwritten in black ink, and the most common revision pattern is that of corrections in pencil applied over base text written in black ink. After constructing the dataset, the second step was to subject it to a clustering process. For this, I used the Pro version of Copilot provided for free of charge to Sapienza staff. It must be said that this step has more demonstrative than actual practical value. The parameters for performing automatic clustering are numerous, starting with the choice of algorithm and including the optimal number of clusters, all elements that influence the outcome and its reliability. At first glance, the clustering seems to hold, but more thorough verification will be necessary. In any case, the process identified 9 clusters that group documents sharing common features. 2 of them, the cluster 2 and cluster 3, are highly populated, covering more than 70% of the dataset and identifying a central block of documentation with shared characteristics, perhaps corresponding to a prevalent moment of textual production. Following this process, we reach a second possible level of ordering. The first is the order of the papers, currently applied in the version published on EVT. The second order, the first of those I will present for a possible edition, is that of grouping documents into homogeneous clusters, which may offer clues about phases of writing and elaborations. A material grouping can indeed suggest chronological proximity, even though this is by no means automatic. The logical leap required can only be made by expanding the sample of integrated with the description of documents belonging to other works. This is a very old slide, but it's to make an example of this. This is especially relevant for a work with a very broad diachrony, if it's true, as Geronimo states, that its composition spans fragments written extremely discontinuously between 1906-07 and 1935. This places the Duke among those works that accompanied Pessoa for most of his life, and certainly shared various material as well as content-based elements. Through comparison of sheets of papers and writing instruments combined with an analysis of evolution of his handwriting, it is possible to identify parameters for dating the documents. This is a very long process, but one that can build gradually, and that, although it does not directly produce an edition, will be fundamental and preparatory for all editions. A generous undertaking not aimed at an immediate and immediately measurable results, but one that will be unavailable for all future work. This process could lead to a third type of possible ordering, that is chronological order, like the work that Geronimo did with the Book of Disquiet. Probably the most advanced and objective among material-based orderings. And this is as far as the elaboration based on documents can take us. The next step is to enter the realm of reconstructing the work. The Duke of Parma has a fairly clear thematic identity, a coherence that becomes evident even in an unsystematic reading, such as the one carried out by following the simple order of the papers in the spolio, in the archive. The plot has some fixed point. The text begins with the account of an episode that causes bewilderment at the court of the Duke of Parma, inappropriate behavior by the Duke, which alarms his advisors. This initial bewilderment is confirmed by subsequent attitudes and statements, giving those closest to him the impression that he constantly oscillates between extreme lucidity and madness. Among the most significant episodes is the rain scene, in which the Duke orders everyone to go out and remain under the water. At court, some begin to plot, thinking they might take advantage of the Duke's possible madness to replace him. And there are those who defend him fiercely, like the Duchess. The notables of the Duchy debate whether the Duke is still fit to rule, but reach no decision. But the Duke does not seem to regain his senses until the situation escalates when he murders his wife. He then flees, eventually reaching the castle of his childhood, where he will die in the arms of his old nurse. Not all fragments and dialogues can be clearly placed within the scheme. But it is evident that what matters, as often happens in Pessoa, is not the story, but the text. The Duke's dialogues and monologues, the construction of a complex and paradoxical discursive logics, of reasoning that is estranging and currently contradictory. Some fragments contain indications of the act that which they belong, but these are very few. For others, if it's possible to identify their position within the overall structure thanks to additional elements. Others seem more ambiguous, potentially fitting various moments of the story. In any case, a careful analysis of this level is the only one that can finally lead us to imagine the actual work. It is a much more nuanced level, one that requires a higher degree of responsibility on the editor's part. But it is the kind of responsibility that must be embraced if one wishes to restore life to the work, to enable a form of reception that makes sense not only for a philological perspective, and to provide an access point that is also useful for the reader, for a reception not limited to specialists. It is on this plane that that the last two forms of ordering I wish to propose can be situated. One is thematic ordering. As with other works, such as the Book of Disquiet, it is possible to propose thematic paths within the Duke. If it's true that what matters is less the story, that the sentences, the logical path, the paradoxes, the force of a common feeling and thinking, then this alone constitutes an effective and accessible ordering. Yet, it remains true that we are not dealing with a diegetical frayed work like the book, but with a theatrical work that should have a precise narrative structure. Thus, the final ordering is that of reconstructing the plot, the one that offers definitive usability and paves the way for reconstructing an editorial form that could even allow, at least partially, the work to reach its originally intended outcome, theatrical performance. Such a reconstruction, in large part bold, perhaps not entirely well-grounded, would nonetheless allow a formal reception of great effectiveness and impact, staging. A lesser fidelity to the objectivity of the material data could lead to a greater fidelity to the conception of the work that Pessoa had in mind. Only in this way we'll be able to fully enjoy and contextualize documents such as, for example, an aged cut-down sheet paper measuring 222 for 162 millimeters, written in black ink with pencil correction, on which we read, "How the stars shine, how they are far, my Lord, and what have thus somehow this sense, and if it was not, and the stars as we, were some stupendous an external dream, how little real is all this reality, how little real that I should be here," etc. And for what senseless reason should we deprive ourselves of such a pleasure? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you to all. I would like to begin thanking particularly the organizers for having involved me and taking part as someone who comes from another planet. Since I'm not a specialist in this field, and I entered this fascinating text taking with me the experience of having been studying a lot of text, a lot of authors, having been in front of different kind of manuscripts, and having been involved in different ways of creating text. And trust me if I tell you that this text is really terrifying, since it has all the characteristics to involve us, to ask, to provoke us. And so I try to change and to exchange with you some ideas, especially after a very fruitful dialogue with Simone, taking this case study as an example of what we should do with this kind of texts and what we should do with scholarly digital edition, since we haven't at the moment a paradigm. We have something useful, XML and TI, and also EVT, but we lack something we can also begin to imagine, also starting from this case study. I will try, even though my participation in this conference has not been continuous, and I lost yesterday debate, and it's a pity, since I know that you discussed a lot, especially on this problem related to a lot of materials, transcriptions, and going on now with the differences between a document-centered edition and a work-centered edition. But this is a great opportunity to engage, to be involved with this extraordinary research group, and to give my editorial experience and my interest in textual theory in dialogue with this distinctive case study. Often talking with my colleague and friend Giulia Raboni, who here at the University of Parma leads the research group responsible for the first monographical portal devoted to Manzoni, which have been a model for a lot of other authors of Italian literature, a model of thematic digital portals, that we now are forced to begin to reflect on textual theory. You know that Italian tradition among philology has been devoted until now more to make editions than on reflecting on them. And it's now time to begin to reflect, to think about the theory of text, because without the theory, we are not able to provide editions and to exchange, to change our state of mind. As Simone Celani has clearly demonstrated, no critical edition can be responsibly prepared without a solid theoretical framing of the philological problem. So let's start from the idea. We share the idea that an edition is a working hypothesis, and the task of the philologist is so threefold. First, preserve document, present them in the most appropriate form for scholarly investigation, and I think that what you have done here, even if there is not even then 1/3 on the amount of the documents, yes, 1/3 more.
Now it's complete.
Now it's complete. So the transcription now is complete. So you did a really great job just to preserve the document and to share in the academic and not only academic environment. Then, second, observe and reconstruct the compositional process. And from this point of view, we probably need something more, adding or asking Roberto Rosselli del Turco, who always goes side by side with a different research group, providing them new solution. You know that EVT started from EVT1, so a solution provided strictly devoted from mono-testimonial, so only one witness editions, and then moving towards EVT2, so multiple witness edition, and now moving to EVT3, genetic editions, which I will show to you later, just as a model which we can integrate to this the transcription of the Duke of Parma. So just to observe and reconstruct the compositional process, in my opinion, it's a goal we have to take in our mind, just to begin from this transcription as a starting point for something fruitful. Third, we should, as philologists, offer the most trustable hypothesis of what the author had in his mind. We know that now, moving from analogic philology to digital one, we are not forced anymore. We can't stop the process, we can't decide. And sometimes it gives to us a solution providing a lot of different text, but at the end of our job, we must decide, and we must try to provide an interpretation. So an edition is always an interpretation, but with the digital philology, we can do both, and it's the very first time we have this possibility. We have the possibility also to share with the reader also our research process, the research process of the philologist. It's the very first time we have this possibility. So normally the philologists work alone and they keep everything in their mind or in their paper or in their draft or in their computer. Now we can share with the reader also our hypotheses. And this is a very brand new chance we can't lose. In the age of print, the third objective, so to offer to the reader the most trustable hypothesis, tend to dominate. And the material constraint of the book imposed a single fixed editorial solution 10 years ago. Not only 10 years ago, we were forced as a moral issue for philologists just to provide an edition. Now we try to work more on the relationship between document and work and try not to be forced anymore. But in my opinion, we must take in our mind that the ultimate goal is to help the reader to go through all this amount of documents. So the well-known relationship between work and document, it's not so common that an issue in philology written in 2013 is helpful also nowadays. But I think that Barbara Bordalejo, and I want to remember that she was the curator of the issue, did a great job, especially gathering all the scholars of the theory of text from the Anglo-American point of view, which was so stranger for us as Italian philology. And especially with the idea of Francisco Rico, who was the founder of Ecdotica, and I want to remember him as a great philologist, is particularly relevant here. In this case, the dialectic between work and document is pushed to an extreme level, especially since I found extremely fascinating the idea of exercise, but the unusually broad chronological span of composition says that we can't only consider this as exercise, since this has been a work Pessoa has in mind, and so we have two different forces. Centrifugal writing practice, and then a centripetal vector, something like a strong vector towards a unified work. And we must try to find a balance between two different and one against the other forces. In my opinion, Simone Celani's presentation of his idea to organize the documents is very productive as a starting point for addressing a certain research question. I would select three of them. How should documents must be visualized and represented within the edition or before the edition, or to provide an edition. The dossier of diplomatic transcription provided in EVT is an essential preliminary overview. It reveals the necessity of multiple categorization, features, material features, chronological development, so many documents we must organize in different ways, or thematic grouping. Clustering is useful at the beginning, but insufficient, since clustering, for example, documents taking into account only the dimension, may order the document starting from a material and not taking into account the chronological relationship between one with the other. But the author may have been worked on these documents in different times, returning, coming back to some part of this work several times. So we need all this perspective, the material one, the chronological one, and the thematic one. Starting from this necessity, probably EVT is not the right tool provided for us, for you as a research group, as philologists, since EVT is a tool specifically addressed to visualize the already done editions, also with the acronym, sorry, as EVA, edition visualization technology. So edition is the crucial starting point. So, thank you. So EVT is really useful, like as a tool to organize when we have already decided what we can do, addressing our attention towards the work, not the document. This doesn't mean that what you have done inside EVT is not useful, since EVT is a visualization of an XML file. And so you can use your XML file, and I have seen all the lot of work transcribing very difficult documents, and you did a great job, you too. Don't remember your name, but my compliments, since the original document is really difficult, especially not only with corrections, but to understand the structure of a poem that has a relationship with problems of verses, and these blank spaces are related with verses. Let's see only a detail. I've noticed in the transcription that Pessoa uses the double line, like an igual. It's really fascinating, since it's the same sign used by Manzoni when he wrote the first draft of his dramatic works, Conte di Carmagnola and Adelchi, because the verse has two different mid-verses, and so this equal is something like a pause which is not something as an orthographic sign, but is something like a breath between two different parts of the verse. And let's take into account that Manzoni himself used this double sign, this strange equal, also in the first draft of The Betrothed, since he didn't want to choose what kind of orthographical sign he would have decided to use. And so we had problems when we made, with Giulia Raboni, under the direction of Dante Isella, made the critical edition of The Betrothed, since at the beginning we couldn't type an equal, which is nothing, which is meaningless in Italian language, but we represented this sign, since the first draft, and it's the same here in these documents, is the a sign of the unstable state of the text. So probably EVT is not the usual useful tool, and it's a pity that Chiara Martignano lecture will take place in Bologna tomorrow. Chiara Martignano have been working with Roberto Rosselli del Turco, and she made a very useful data set of software, of tools, useful for digital philology, starting from a collection of documents, not only to transcribe the text, to visualize the text, but also to organize the document. So tomorrow I will host Chiara Martignano lecture, and so I will know, asking Chiara Martignano, which may be the most useful tool to organize all the documents in advance, just balancing with another tool what you have done with EVT. Second, what is the editorial impact on the way this material is read and interpreted? Editorial representation shapes interpretation. And so we must take into account that it's a goal, the work is a goal, but it's dangerous, somewhat dangerous, since the risk is to provide the reader a organization of the document, a work which is more in our mind than in Pessoa mind, but balancing the digital edition with a print, we provide the reader both, and we provide the reader the possibility to organize, even if we give with a print edition, hopefully a trustable work, we provide the reader the possibility to organize all the documents in another way. And in my opinion, we must begin thinking digital philology integrated with print philology, without avoiding the duty to establish a text, but balancing with the possibility of multiple text and multiple visualization. The compositional logic of this work does not necessarily coincide with the chronological order. And so it's fascinating to have the possibility, asking Roberto Rosselli del Turco, for example, if he can, is a research group, can integrate in EVT the possibility to organize all the documents in another order, since now we have the not a chronological order, it's a documentary-centered order, but another order could be really useful just to understand the relationship. So, and integrating, in my opinion, the third possibility to see the documents in a thematic and according to the order of the work, not the order of the document and not the order of the chronological writing process. Let's also take into account the archival wheel. It's a very crucial concept. We began to think about 4 years ago when we organized with Monica Zanardo at the University of Padua a congress devoted to the concept of the archival wheel. Usually we think about the authorial wheel, but the archival wheel is to be taken into account, since we can't consider all these amount of documents in a generic order. The author decides to leave us his or her archive according to a precise will, and we must recognize, and we must take into account, even if this order must be also fictional, since also in the archival will we must beware of the author. Literary manuscripts may be manipulated, misdated, or paradoxically documents farthest removed from literary intention may sometimes prove more materially reliable. If we want to compare documents, for example, comparing different handwriting, sometimes we must take into account that documents, very simple documents, not literary text, are more fruitful, since documents as letters or simple documents are not fictionally. And so trying to organize a data set of all the handwriting could be really fruitful. As something just to go together towards the work. Third and last, who are the readers of a digital scholarly edition? Who are the readers? This case study compels us to reflect on the intended readership of a digital scholarly edition. Even if a universally accepted reading order of the work cannot be established, the individual document retains intrinsic scholarly value, yet this distinction invites a broader theoretical question. If in digital age is a philology oriented primarily toward the author, the reader or the editor, since sometimes scholarly digital editions are not author-oriented or reader-oriented, are editor-oriented. So we must avoid this problem. The diplomatic edition, the transcription of the last readings of each preserved document, is a useful starting point. But in my opinion, starting from this transcription, we must make something before and organize all these documents, if possible, through a new, something different, a new tool, in order to understand how Shoah worked, and is it necessary to combine the diplomatic edition with the critical edition. And so let's see what they have done with the collection of songs, of poems, of Umberto Saba. Let's take an example just to see how it works. With the EVT3, the Roberto Rossari del Turco research group, they decided not only to represent the description of correction, but to make an interpretation of all the layers and all the phases of correction. So to try to understand the phases of correction. This doesn't mean that it's the only way to represent the text. It's the critical genetic edition, not a diplomatic genetic edition. But in my opinion, combining two different perspectives may be fruitful, just using, in this case, EVT and integrating EVT. I think that you have been used EVT2 with EVT3 specifically thought to represent the genetic process, but a genetic process in phases, in layers, and trying to reconstruct the phases which may be comparable in order to provide the reader something which allows the reader to make a critical interpretation, a real criticism of a variant, because you may make an act of criticism only if you compare comparable elements. Without two comparable elements, you can only read, you can only make a reading of the original document. But with this case study, in my opinion, they did a great job in trying to represent the phases. It follows that digital philology framework has not only enhanced the text as a process, but has also made it possible to enhance the philological process itself and all the stages that were previously sacrificed to the ultimate goal, the publication of the edition. And I think that they must be integrated. So the result of the work of preparing the edition itself must be put in dialogue, letting the reader to go inside not only the author's working table, but also the editors working table, and sharing all this document and providing inside, if not in EVT, in some other environment, digital environment. So this is a broader view of philology, not only to provide a stable text, but really building an environment of scholars, a scholarship environment that could begin from the most process-oriented of all modern writers. Thank you. Thank you a lot.
We are open to questions. I can see the microphone. Who would like to open the discussion, to make any comment? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your discussion of the possibilities of turning this archive into a work. My question is for Simone. You sketched different ways of moving from the documents to the work. Do you think we can arrive at a work with this fragmentary, or will be always in between the archive and the work? Is there a work here?
$1 million.
This is the question. I think. Possibly, probably, there is. I think that the problem is that I think that we can reach this work is a good thing. It's wonderful, and I think that we made tentative to reach this possible work. I don't know if there is here the work. I don't know. I'm hoping that there is a work. I think that if we can reach this work, we can do a great present to all the readers that are not the same readers that Paola speak of, but other readers that are not in this room. But I think that can love this possibly hypothetical work.
I think that actually we can, in this case, try to think about the work as once again built by the readers, and the fact that we are all debating if this is a work for 2 days and for 2 years. This is the work. It may not be finished, it may not be in the documents, but it's in our readership of it. And then the hypothesis of editing the editor's choices is meaningful in this sense, I think.
Thank you for this observation. I think that let's take into account also all that you have already understood in transcribing, since the transcription is the first interpretation. Even if you don't provide the work, you make an interpretation. And going through your transcription, I had, for example, the necessity to mark up, I don't know if it is possible, it's only an idea, to mark up the empty spaces, just to have the possibility to extract all the empty spaces. It's something provocative, since when you make the philology, you must take into account the text, not the lacking of the text. But in this case, just to make a markup for the empty spaces, it could be really useful. And so, providing the reader, when the reader goes through EVT, also the possibility to extract information, not only name and places, which I've seen that it's more or less done, but also all other features inside the document, and providing some elements which let the reader able also to reconstruct the ultimate work you hopefully publish in another way.
Yeah, and in any case, the next question is by Carlos Pitella. Sometimes you do not have the ultimate work or text. He did 2 versions of Fausto, and I know he plans to do 1 or 2 more. And he is the same person?
No, definitely not 1 more. But I'm a little bit skeptical, maybe I misunderstood, but I'm a little bit skeptical about privileging the work versus the document. Am I too loud?
Too loud.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, I feel a little bit skeptical about giving an implicit privilege to the work versus documents. I feel like with Fausto, that Geronimo mentioned, went the opposite way. We had a lot of works that had been edited, versions of this, without a transparent apparatus, without the work of chronology, of document analysis. So I feel like we did the opposite. We went from the work back to the documents, and that was the important thing to see the work afresh, to try to think of alternative arrangements of this. And I love that, as you mentioned...
It was the same case with the Book of Disquiet,
Exactly.
because the critical edition was done many years, 40 years after the thematical first edition.
Yeah, and so perhaps I will see as 2 facets of the same thing, not necessarily with one with a hierarchy that we have to arrive at a work. We have to, maybe it's a different meaning of work, but we can see the work in front of us. Now, the constructions, maybe just the word that is misleading, the word work as something to arrive, that I'm having a resistance to. But I love that in the digital world, we can provide alternative works, right?
In a certain sense, I agree, but I think also to the common reader. And I think that we must give the common reader something, not only saying that the common reader must go through all the stuff that we provide scholarly in the digital edition, also because we know that the digital edition probably in the next 5 years, 10 years, we don't know if they will survive. We are making a great job, yeah, but it's a thing. We can't avoid this state of art. We will be obliged probably to save the XML file, to find other visualization technology, but when we print, we know that this work, this interpretation, this edition as an interpretation will survive more or less 5, not 5 years, but 500 years. So I think that this gives us as philologists a broader view, taking into account all the elements. And it's a good idea coming back from the work to the document, but when we have a work, now we have a list of documents. So I think it's fascinating in general.
I wanted to go to a parallel direction, because the question that Professor Manuel Portela made right now is somewhat the question that Enrico asked me when I was starting the project. Do you think that it's going to be a work? And at the time, my answer was something like, Enrico, let it go. No, I think that we will never reach that phase. But I actually changed my mind. So now I think that there is a work. And assuming that there is a work, my question to Paola and to Simone also would be, if So there is a work. Let's pretend that we all agree on the fact that there is a work. Is there an edition of that work? Is it possible to make an edition of this work that is, and I will quote Professor Manuel Portela's paper yesterday, that is intelligible. I don't know how to say that. Is this edition, do you think, Paola, that it will be possible to this edition be hosted in using the same tool that we have used for the digital archive, maybe EVT 4 or 5 or 6, who knows?
Thank you for this question, but you addressed this question to me, but I'm not a specialist at all of this topic, this author, this field. In my opinion, starting from a documentary edition, since what you have done is a documentary edition, you must also provide to the reader an edition deciding, for example, when a genetic variant must be represented or not. So if you want to transcribe the latest author's will, you skip the apparatus criticus, since the apparatus is something related to specialists and not to common reader, or to take into account, I have seen some point where you have alternative variants. You don't know if there is a word or another, and you must take into account, according to authorial philology, that you must transcribe on the text the latest author's will, and taking the alternative variants as a possibility, providing the reader the double text. So, why not? I am willing to take part of your next conference just to follow this research group and to involve also all my students of my class, the advanced class of scholarly digital edition in Bologna, just to take this as a case study. Since all these questions must be addressed also not to specialists, but also to those who go through this edition from another planet, as I have done. So, Simone, will you respond?
No, and I was going to say, and I feel we are already in the round table, so we have to move on. But I think that we have and we do not have that text. And that we have and we do not have a work, and that we will have and we will not have an edition. Because I can imagine, and that's happening, I mean, Manuel Portela did a great edition of the Book of Disquiet, and it includes 4, and it could include more versions or editions of the Book of Disquiet. And with most of Pessoa's work, we will not have one proposal, but many proposals, and that's what we can expect. So in that sense, it's very difficult to think we have one or we will have one. I think this is just the preliminary display of multiplicity. Well, so thank you so much. Let's please move to the round table. We are